Commissioner, welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself and proceed.
Good morning, Co-Chair France and Co-Chair Lee and members of the committee. My name is Erin Campbell and I'm the Commissioner at Minnesota Management and Budget. I'm here today to present an overview of the Governor's 2026 infrastructure plan, and I know that you'll be hearing more from agency partners in the coming days. Today I'll walk you through the capital budget process, the Governor's infrastructure plan, and the funding for that plan. First, we'll talk about the capital budget process that MMB facilitates. MMB collects information for the capital budget as directed by state statute. The process is open to state agencies and political subdivisions whose capital projects are generally eligible for general obligation bonds. MMB provides training and technical assistance to political subdivisions and state agencies to submit requests to MMB. Requests are collected in odd-numbered calendar years, and the Governor's recommendations are published in January of the even-numbered years. MMB publishes instructions. We did so for the 2026 capital budget in May of 2025. We hosted a Q&A session and provided instructions and assistance to agencies and political subdivisions who were submitting requests. The initial state agency and political subdivision requests were published by MMB in July of 2025. MMB received almost $7 billion in requests this year, $3.8 billion from state agencies, and $3 billion from political subdivisions. To better understand the range of requests, MMB staff visited some project sites and projects that had been built with funds from previous bonding bills. We conducted meetings with requesting entities and provided technical assistance to ensure the full scope of project needs were being met within the rules of how GO bonds can be used. On January 15th, MMB published the Governor's recommendations and all final requests on our website. Just as a reminder, there were some changes in the last legislative session that will impact how we put together bonding bills. A provision in the 2025 state government omnibus law directs MMB to no longer assume future general obligation bond authorizations in the budget and economic forecast. So what this means is that the full cost of the general obligation bond debt service for future bonding bills will need to be tracked against the bottom line of the general fund. Previously, the budget forecast assumed the enactment of a bonding bill consistent with recent averages. Here's some highlights from our 2026 bonding tours. They're not quite as robust as yours, but we looked at both recently completed projects and new requests. We visited the Robbinsdale Water Treatment Facility that was assisted by a low-interest loan from the Public Facilities Authority. This visit, of course, demonstrates how crucial water infrastructure funding is for improving water quality for local governments. We visited the Spring Lake Park Reserve in Dakota County to see how the Met Council's Parks and Trails grants are invested in improving walking and biking paths, and also, in that case, reintroducing a herd of bison to the park. We also visited the DNR's Metro Fish Hatchery to see the crucial research and fish management work being done there, and also the aging infrastructure that puts that important work at risk. The facility's last major upgrade was in 1989, and improvements to the hatchery rank as DNR's top priority for its betterment of buildings program. Next, I'll walk you through what Governor Walz is proposing. This slide shows the distribution of the Governor's 2026 infrastructure plan across several categories. The Governor recommends a total of $907 million in funding from all sources. I will show in more detail how that funding breaks down a little bit later in this presentation. Consistent with the Governor's priorities last legislative session, the Governor recommends a total of $316 million in asset preservation investments. That represents 45% of the general obligation bonds in this bill and 35% of all funds. The state agencies with the highest deferred maintenance were prioritized. So the highlights there include $75 million for Minnesota State and the University of Minnesota, $54 million for the Department of Corrections, $30 million for the Department of Natural Resources, and $24 million each for Veterans Affairs and Direct Care and Treatment. State facilities face a significant backlog of deferred maintenance, $6.7 billion across state agencies, Minnesota State, and the University of Minnesota. State agencies receive their funding to upkeep facilities through this committee and asset preservation appropriations. When these appropriations are insufficient to meet facility needs, the work cannot be completed, becomes deferred maintenance. As you have observed on tours this interim, state facility teams do an excellent job working with limited resources. But as conditions deteriorate, they can become more expensive to resolve. The average cost for a deferred maintenance project for a facility in excellent condition is $6,000, but that cost rises to $196,000 for facilities in crisis condition. Looking just at state agencies, a $1.3 billion backlog in 2015 has nearly doubled to $2.3 billion, even during that time that the legislature enacted two of the largest bonding bills in state history. It is this growing issue of deferred maintenance that drives much of the governor's recommendations being devoted to asset preservation. Asset preservation projects are improvements to existing state assets to address life and safety hazards, accessibility, security, building code violations, and to eliminate hazardous materials. It's not about constructing new buildings, it's about protecting the facilities that we already have and the investments that we've already made. The 2025 bonding bill made a historic $216 million investment in asset preservation, and we are really very grateful to the legislature to devoting such a significant share of the bill to asset preservation compared to other enacted bills in the last decade. As you can see, asset preservation funds are invested across the state. This map shows all facilities that would be eligible to receive asset preservation funds from the governor's plan. The governor is recommending asset preservation funding for 14 agencies with facilities located across the state. About 45% would be invested in greater Minnesota, and 55% would be invested in the 7-county metro area. And this split aligns with where state facilities are located. We've got about 47% of facilities in greater Minnesota and about 53% in the metro area. Following asset preservation, water and transportation infrastructure make up the next largest share of the governor's recommendations. We know there continues to be a huge demand for water infrastructure funding. In fact, 1/3 of the local government requests that MMB received totaled $1 billion were for water infrastructure projects. And we know that this only represents a portion of the need. MPCA published a report just last month identifying $2.7 billion in wastewater infrastructure needs alone. That is why the governor's plan invests $113 million in water infrastructure programs for wastewater, clean drinking water, replacing lead service lines, and addressing emerging contaminants. More than 1 million Minnesotans live in communities with high priority drinking and wastewater infrastructure projects. This funding would support those communities in addressing water needs. The governor's plan also invests $50 million in high priority pavement projects on trunk highways across the state and $4 million for infrastructure needs of publicly owned ports on the Mississippi River and on Lake Superior. The governor's plan continues to prioritize public safety by investing $47 million for the renovation and expansion of the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension's Bemidji Regional Office and Forensics Science Laboratory. This project will provide additional space and resources to support increased demand for investigatory and laboratory analysis for criminal investigations in northern Minnesota. The expanded space will also be used for training BCA and local law enforcement officers. The governor recommends $41 million for Capitol Complex security upgrades. This would fully fund the recommendations that were made last month by the Advisory Committee on Capital Area Security. The governor's plan also includes $61 million for the Department of Corrections to expand the Rush City Correctional Facility to provide educational, rehabilitative, and other programming for people who are incarcerated. This project will give incarcerated persons access to education, behavioral health, religious, medical, and other services. The legislature and the Walz administration have invested $500 million in housing infrastructure bonds since 2020, and the governor's plan continues to prioritize affordable housing by recommending $50 million in housing infrastructure bonds. This investment will preserve or create between 450 and 550 homes. The governor is also recommending $10 million in public housing rehab grants to local governments to improve locally owned public housing across the state. This investment will preserve between 350 and 450 homes. As in recent years, rather than earmarks for individual local government projects, the governor recommends $170 million in funding for competitive agency grant programs and set aside an amount of $35 million for the legislature to appropriate to specific projects. Together, this means that over $200 million of the governor's plan would go towards local government projects. The governor's plan prioritizes investments in outdoor recreation and Minnesota's natural environment by investing in parks and trails, including making state parks more accessible. The governor's plan includes $10 million for dam safety repair and $9 million for flood hazard mitigation. $9 million for the Reinvest in Minnesota, or RIM program, will be used to acquire permanent easements in ecologically sensitive areas to improve water quality and wildlife habitat. $5 million for the DNR aviation infrastructure at the Brainerd Regional Airport will support and improve the DNR's emergency responses for wildfires, search and rescue operations, and other safety and natural resource management needs. The bill also includes $5 million for replacing wetlands drained or filled by local government road construction projects. $50 million is included for the Rural Finance Authority loans, and this will help Minnesota farmers obtain affordable financing. The RFA offers low-interest loans for land purchases, farm improvements, equipment, operating capital, disaster relief, and other activities. Also of note, the governor's plan invests $19 million for the demolition of the Centennial Office Building. This building is nearly 70 years old. It is in poor condition and beyond its useful life. Cost estimates to repair the building range from $175 to $250 million. After the Centennial Office Building renovation, after the State Office building renovation is complete, 70% of the space in the Centennial Office Building will be vacant. The remaining tenants will be moved to the Transportation Building at that time. To prepare this space, the governor recommends $22 million for renovating the Transportation Building. The governor's plan also includes $19 million for direct care and treatment in St. Peter for replacing the water, sanitary, and storm sewer infrastructure to ensure clients and staff have access to safe, functioning water infrastructure. The 2023 bonding bill appropriated the state share of $78 million for demolition and replacement of administrative and residential buildings for the domiciliary program at Hastings Veterans Home. It is now clear that the federal government will not be awarding Minnesota funds to complete the original project scope. So the governor recommends repurposing these funds for other investments in domiciliary programs. The funds would now be used for scaled-down renovation of the Hastings Veterans Home and a renovation of Building 16 at the Minneapolis Veterans Home. To summarize here, the $750 million of this package is general obligation bonds, $50 million of which is user financed. Another $157 million is made up of other funds such as appropriation bonds, trunk highway cash, general fund cash, for a total of $907 million in all funds. The debt service costs for bonds is paid off over a 20-year period. This table shows the biennial impact of the governor's recommendations to the general fund and to the trunk highway fund. The general fund shows the total cost of debt service for the governor's recommendations. As I mentioned earlier, the November 2025 forecast did not include an assumption about the size of the bonding bill enacted in this legislative session or future legislative sessions. So the full cost of the governor's recommendations need to be tracked against the bottom line of the general fund. Overall, the general fund impact is $57.3 million this biennium and $94.2 million next biennium. The trunk highway fund impact is $13.4 million this biennium and $7.8 million next biennium. The governor's recommendations continue to make infrastructure investments that are critical to the state while remaining within the debt capacity guidelines and striking a balance between needed investments and fiscal responsibility. Just as a reminder, materials for the 2026 governor's recommendations are posted on MMB's website. There you can find a summary of all state and local project requests and those that were included in the governor's infrastructure plan. And with that, I thank you for hearing the overview of the governor's recommendations. I know agencies will present more detail on individual projects, but I'm happy to try to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Commissioner. Chair Franson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Campbell, one of the things that I'm concerned about is the debt service. Where are we coming up with the debt service for this this bonding bill here? Where does the governor plan on taking the money from, just so we have an idea if it's palatable or not, because I don't see that on here.
Commissioner Campbell.
Chair Lee, Chair Franson, you'll see more detail about that when the governor releases a supplemental budget bill, but that won't be until after the forecast. And I think what you'll find is that the money isn't coming off of the bottom line. We will be looking for places to reduce in order to pay for the debt service.
Chair Franson.
Thank you, Commissioner. I would think, though, that you would anticipate that answer or that question today. Can you give us any ideas of what areas he's planning on reducing just to start softening the blow here?
Commissioner Campbell.
Chair Lee, Chair Franson, I can't. That's not my information to share at this time. That information will be available when the governor's supplemental budget becomes available.
Chair Kosnick.
Thank you, Commissioner. You'd mentioned that there's some tenants here in the Centennial Building that will be moving to Transportation Building. What agencies are moving? Would that be, aside from the House, obviously?
Commissioner Campbell.
Chair Lee, Representative Kosnick, there are very few agencies left in the Centennial Office Building. MMB is one of them. And then there are some boards and commissions. I believe the OLA's office is still located in that building. Again, it's only 30% of the tenants in the building at this time.
Chair Kosnick.
Thank you. So there might not be that many agencies, but there are other commissions and stuff. In this proposal, you have $8 million from the Trunk Highway Fund going to the Transportation Building consolidation and remodeling. So you're saying it's appropriate use of transportation dollars, trunk highway dollars for these other agencies and commissions?
Commissioner Campbell.
Chair Lee and Representative Kosnick, no, that money is only appropriately used for the Department of Transportation, and the Department of Transportation will also be relocating within the building. And so those funds will be used for their relocation purposes.
Chair Kosnick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess we'll have to take a closer look at that because I have concerns about using trunk highway dollars for remodeling buildings. We're already falling behind on maintaining our roads. We have local cities probably sitting behind me and around us that have projects that they would like help with. And you're suggesting that we're remodeling the transportation building. I'm not sure that that sits very well with trunk highway dollars.
Commissioner Campbell.
Chair Lee, Representative Kosnick, the transportation building has been built with trunk highway fund dollars. And so it is, whether or not it is the priority of everybody to do that or not is a question, but whether or not it is appropriate or not, I think we feel we know the answer to that.
And Commissioner Campbell, to that point, I think on the spreadsheet that we have received from staff, excuse me, and from you guys is that there's $2 million to the Department of Transportation for the same purpose. And I think Chair Kosnick, to that point, that's why they're using the $2 million for the general fund cash. And so are you able to speak to that? Is the $2 million for the space that will be habited by the non-Department of Transportation, please?
Chair Lee, it is my understanding that that is correct, and that is a recommendation from our partners at the Department of Transportation who have assessed what would be appropriate.
Thank you. Chair Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioner. You know, recycling is important, and with the Centennial Building, since it was the Centennial Building for the centennial of the state, rather than having it demolished and go into a construction debris landfill, are there any plans for like recovering the granite facades? Is there anything of the building that's there where it could be reused? I would think that maybe that could be distributed to artists around the state for memorials. It would be something that could be used rather than just smashing it and burying it. There's a lot of you know, as we go through all these buildings, there's a lot of history that's embedded in them and a lot of energy as well. And it would seem that there'd be a way of reusing. Are there any plans for any reuse of the materials?
Chair Hansen, we have the Department of Administration after this, and so maybe that will be more directed towards them. But Commissioner Campbell, if you have any response.
Chair Lee, Representative Hansen, your point is well taken, and I don't know the answer to that, but I assume that my colleagues at the Department of Administration will be able to speak to that.
Chair Hansen? Members, any additional questions? Seeing none, thank you, Commissioner Campbell. Oh, Chair Lilly, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. Just a couple questions, quick, on the outdoor and recreation. Do we have an idea how much is like going into parks and trails per se? You know, I see dam repair and local roads in that area and the airport, but like how much, do you know how much is actually going to parks and trails?
Commissioner Campbell.
Chair Lee, Chair Lee, Representative Lilly, it would be $1 million at DNR and $1 million for the Met Council, Parks and Trails.
Chair Lilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's it. It just doesn't. And then another, we might have to modify that a little, I hope. So then on the water infrastructure, I'd just be curious if you can break it down a little bit in that category, like how much is Metro? Because you do that in another area, Metro versus Greater Minnesota.
Commissioner Campbell.
Chair Lee, Representative Lilly, about 70% of the projects go to Greater Minnesota.
Chair Lilly.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, members, so just more on specific, if you, so we do have the spreadsheet in your package too, and so if you have any specific questions, take a look at that. And then today, Commissioner Campbell is just here to provide a high overview on the governor's proposal. And so we will be having the individual state agencies come before us too, and at that time, you can ask more specific questions. Thank you, Commissioner Campbell.
Thank you for having me.